Welcome to the ChairLife podcast with Tom Cuthbert. As a CEO coach and master chair, Tom brings you the insights, strategies, and tools to help you build your chair life, where mission and purpose intersect with a balanced work life. This is the path to leading with impact while living with intention. Let's dive in. Here's your host, Tom Cuthbert.
Eric Sevareid said, "Better to trust the man who is frequently in error than one who is never in doubt." Now, this quote really highlights the value of candor and feedback inside our Vistage community. We all make mistakes, and we all learn from those mistakes. But in an environment where feedback is the norm and carefrontation, as we like to say, is used every single day in every meeting and in every conversation, that's a pretty unique environment. And so today we're focusing on high-performing behavior number 7. High-performing members embrace and provide feedback. Today we're on the second half of our 12 high-performing behaviors, with number 7 counting down to number 12 all the way over the next several weeks. And high-performing behaviors focusing on feedback is really a true cornerstone of everything that we do in Vistage. And today I want to make sure we understand why it's important for us as chairs and CEOs and coaches to create an environment where feedback is embraced, not avoided, both within our groups, in our one-to-ones, and in our community. And so I want to do that by really leaning in to understanding the value of feedback and why feedback matters, and then give you some specific examples inside our community that we can really lean into and apply to our life and our work. I'll never forget my first day walking into Vistage Corporate now, 13 years ago, and somebody walked up to me and introduced themselves and put their arm around me and said, Tom, Vistage is a feedback-rich environment. And here I am all these years later, 14 years later, and it is exactly that. And it is that in such a positive way. Having a feedback-rich space really builds trust. It raises the bar on conversations and impact of those conversations, and it certainly strengthens our community. Without candor, without open comment, without trust between people, our growth stalls. We don't learn from errors. We fail and just fail again. And so feedback is the fuel that helps us grow and get better. Teams with regular feedback, according to Gallup, see a 14.9% lower turnover rate. When people know where they stand, they're able to do their best. The inverse of that, of course, is they don't. And so we have to model this. We need to make sure our members know where they stand and know what's expected from them. The high-performing behaviors that we put out are the very first part of that. That's exactly why this exists. So we model the safe space in our high-performing groups, and we do this by asking questions. I love Warren Berger's book called The Book of Beautiful Questions. What a great and simple name. And in it, there's a quote that says, "Good feedback usually tells you what's wrong or missing, but may not offer a solution. Use questioning to pull that out of the feedback giver." And that is exactly what we do. We do that in one-to-ones, in group meetings, and quite candidly, we should be doing that in every conversation. There's some key elements of this behavior that are really important for us, and I wanted to give you some practical things to take into your meeting to really lean in so you know exactly how to apply this and how to elevate the level of feedback, discourse, and deepen conversation inside your groups. The first one is surveys, really asking members to complete surveys for speakers, surveys for meetings. They rate our one-to-ones. We can ask that just simply. We don't need a formal survey, just at the end of a one-to-one. Hey, how did we do today? What would you give us on a scale of 1 to 10? And what could we do better next time to make this more impactful for you? Asking for that feedback by formal surveys that Vistage sends out, or simply asking it in a candid conversation, helps raise the bar, helps us understand where we are, and what we need to do to get better. It aligns with the question that I ask myself all the time. Who do I need to be for this person at this moment? And if I need to be tougher on them, they're going to tell me that. If I need to listen more, they're going to tell me that. So asking for survey feedback and informal and formal is first step. Secondly, sharing ideas and making sure that in our discussions, everyone's voice is heard. Some people are naturally more outgoing than others. And you know who those are in your groups. And that's great. We need to have those voices there as well. Other people need to be encouraged and prompted and even called on to make sure that their voice is heard. We do this in our groups by calling them out and making sure everyone is heard. I'll say things like, now I want to hear from someone who's not shared anything. In our groups, I have a champion, which is kind of my right-hand person in the group. If we do breakout sessions, that person helps me facilitate. And then all of our groups have ambassadors, and we'll be talking about that more in a future episode. But the ambassador is just the person that I can count on to get the pulse of what's happening in the group. They're also listening around the room to make sure that everyone is participating and every voice is heard. I mentioned carefrontation earlier. Carefrontation, of course, is a made-up Vistage word that just means I care about you and love and care for you so much that I'm going to confront you. I'm going to tell you what I really think. And we obviously do that in a respectful and candid way, but we're going to say things like, you know, I heard what you said. I'm not sure you meant it. Or, you mentioned this last time and I've not seen any progress on that. What's behind that? Carefrontation should be in every conversation that we have. For people that want to grow, which is everyone in our Vistage community, carefrontation builds accountability. It builds growth. It allows us to challenge each other in a respectful way that strengthens the relationship, not weakens it. And we have to be careful with carefrontation with people that we don't know or don't have a relationship with. It can be seen as off-putting and create distance between us and the other person. But in the Vistage environment, where we're all playing under the same set of rules, we're all there to learn and grow, it is so critical for everything that we do. The last key element is just learning from mistakes. You know, I think back on all the mistakes that I've made in life, and it's a big number that have been very costly in many ways, not just financially. And those mistakes are things that I've learned from. You know, Elon Musk has a blowing things up approach, which I love. And with SpaceX, I guess it certainly applies. He says that failure is not an option here. If things are not failing, you're not innovating enough. And I think that mindset is good for us with some guardrails around it. I also like the quote from Henry Ford that simply says, the only real mistake is the one which we learned nothing. We have to learn from our mistakes. And so the two dynamics of this as it relates to our Vistage community, one is for us as chairs to share our mistakes, to tell stories about things over our career, which for almost all of us is longer than those of our members. The mistakes that we've made, the impact of that mistake, and most importantly, what we learned from it and how we applied that differently. Secondly, is to create an environment where others are telling stories. They're sharing their mistakes. They're helping others see things that they're not in order to improve. Mistakes are drawn out from asking great questions. Now, on my website, I have a whole page dedicated to a bunch of questions that I've collected, and it's just tomcuthbert.com/questions. And so by asking people, what brings you joy? What creates anxiety? If you weren't afraid, what would you do? Why do you do what you do on Mondays, for example? Or what would you do differently? Any question that causes people to stop and think and reflect is a great question. And so you'll learn and hear stories about mistakes or things that people are either have done poorly and made mistakes from and what they've learned, or are doing now that we could help them course correct. For years, having breakfast with an old friend, and I've shared this story with you guys before, my old friend would sit with me and at that time, young friends, and he was just very thoughtful. And we'd sit there and complain about things and talk about this or that. He'd finally just say, you are where you are. And I always thought, what does that even mean? But the reality is we are where we are. The difference is the key, and what he would always say next is you have control. You can decide what your next step is. And so by challenging our members and learning from mistakes and sharing ours, we're creating this environment where Carefrontation turns into action and guides that next step. So the practical things we can do to make sure that high-performing members embrace and provide feedback: reinforce surveys, ask them to fill them out, and ask them directly, how are we doing? What do you need more of and less of from me, from Vistage, from each other? Leaning into accountability teams, the member selection process, the group meetings, the speakers, get feedback on every aspect of our community. Secondly is facilitate and model Carefrontation. Guide those tough talks. Use open-ended questions. Be curious. Learn from books like Conversational Capacity by Craig Weber, how to strengthen a relationship by asking tough questions. And third, model feedback. Share your mistakes openly. Talk about the things that you've learned. Take your meetings and make them a place where every voice is heard and everyone feels comfortable in sharing that. Let's not make mistakes that we don't learn from. Let's make mistakes together and learn from them and build an environment where we can all grow to be high-performing leaders.
Now it's time for Tom's tips and tricks to optimize your productivity and your chair life.
If you can't measure it, you can't improve it, says Peter Drucker famously. And without quantifying issues, we're leaving some value on the floor. Now, let me tell you what I mean by that, because today I want to respond to a question from Meredith Jolly. Meredith is a new chair, and she sent me a note to the ChairLife podcast and asked me about how we and why we value issues when doing issue processing. And so, Meredith, thanks for the question. And as a reminder to all of you, feel free to shoot me a note if there's something that you'd like me to chat about. For years, we have put a value on every issue that we process. And there are several reasons that I'll discuss today as to why we do that and why I think it's important for you to consider doing that. Additionally, I'll give you my really weird math formula for calculating it. And just bear with me, I do not have a finance and accounting background, and this is not true math. This is a spitball. But let's get into that, and let's talk about why it's so important for us to put a dollar value on the issues that we process in our group meetings. So when we process an issue, it's important that there is some dollar value attached to it first, because it helps the members focus on it. Now, we have a lot of different size companies in my group, from several million to over $1 billion. And so bigger issues are going to be from bigger companies, and the dollar value may be more. That really doesn't matter. What matters is we're processing an issue, even if it's worth, say, $250,000 to this member or $2 million to this member. It really doesn't matter. Putting a dollar value on it reminds the members when we're moving through the issue processing section that is an important issue to Sarah, or that is an important issue to John. And it really puts that dollar value up there. Just putting it on the sheet that we're processing drops it in the corner. That is why it's so important. It sharpens their focus. Secondly, it shows the value of Vistage. It's a great selling point, quite candidly. Each of my two CEO groups have processed well over $1 billion in issues this year. We processed a true, mathematically true, $100 million issue for one of our member companies last month. And it's really important for members to see that. We put it on our placemats, the cumulative dollar value of issues that we process for my key groups and my CEO groups. And when they see hundreds of millions of dollars of issues processed and know that some of that belongs to them, It's pretty rare when they talk too much or worry about the cost of Vistage. Instead, they're focusing on the dollar value. And then the third reason I think it's important is it allows us to follow up. We're tracking issues that were a $250,000 issue or a $10 million issue, checking in on the next meeting. Hey, Sarah, we talked to you about this issue. How did you do with that? What action have you taken to solve that $1 million issue that you have inside your business? So there's just an example, some ideas about why we do this. And it's very easy to do. Normally, when I'm having the members restate the issue, I ask the person who has the issue to spend a minute calculating what the value of that issue is. And here's the way that I frame it. And let me kind of walk you through an example. I'll try to make the example simple so you can follow along. But again, it's not scientific. It's not in any way accurate. Think of it as a spitball. Lick your fingers, stick it in the wind, and see what it feels like. It's kind of what we're doing here. I asked the question, if we solve this issue well, what is the financial impact to your business over the next 12 to 18 months? And that impact could go in two directions. One would be if we solve it well and correct the problem, and all of a sudden you're moving in the right direction. What is the financial gain that you'll have on that? Another way to think about it was if we don't. I had a member that was losing $250,000 a week by not solving a problem inside their business. That's a big issue. And that's the other way to think of it. If that goes on for 18 months, that's an extraordinarily high number. And so that's another way to think about it. And again, don't get caught up in the math, but let me try to walk you through an example. Let's say that a member has an underperforming VP of sales. And in this example, this is a $25 million company, and this leader has a $10 million annual target for new revenue, and they're currently 10% short. So they're $1 million off their target. And his team of 10 sales people, 5 are underperforming, 5 are below their target. And for simplicity, this is a 30% margin business. So don't get caught up in the margin. Is it sales? Is it margin? Again, it's just a spitball. But that at least gives you some guidance on it. So in this case, let's just say this leader is missing $1 million of revenue for the year. They're $10 million annual target. They're 10% off. So that's $1 million of revenue at a 30% margin. You could argue that's a $300,000 issue. However, that's not all of the issue, because I mentioned this leader has 5 of their 10 salespeople underperforming. So it may be that 5 of those leaders, those salespeople rather, need to go. And so what does it cost to replace someone? Well, a good industry guiding principle is 2 times their annual salary. So let's say these people make $75,000 a year and you're going to replace 5 of them. So that's 150 times 5. That's $750,000 of expense in removing these people and replacing them with someone else. You could also argue that you're going to have lost revenue for several months. And if these 5 people don't work out, if we've hired the wrong people and need to replace them, then guess what? You're going to have lost revenue for a period of time. And so that's another calculation that you could throw on here. Just the kind of main categories to think about in a scenario like this is, what is the lost revenue or the missed revenue for a period of time, and or profit? Again, I don't think it really matters. I think you're just kind of working towards a number. You could break that down for quarterly and think about if this happens for 4 quarters or 6 quarters, it compounds, it gets worse. A second one in this scenario is the hiring and recruitment and training costs. So what would you need to do, and what would that cost? Maybe training somebody is going to cost $20,000 a year for sessions of training using programs like Sandler or something to grow that leader back into a productive salesperson. I don't know. Maybe it's extra time from another executive. Maybe the CEO needs to spend time on this problem. And then, as I mentioned, lost productivity is another metric that you can kind of back of a napkin calculate. And then another one to think about is morale and turnover impact. So losing and changing people on a team, that creates impact. it also has an impact on culture. And so we have to be careful that we're guarding the culture of the business, because you could equate that to a financial impact. So going back to my example, $25 million company, $10 million of revenue target for this underperforming VP. They're $1 million off at a 30% margin. The simple math is it's a $300,000 issue. But then you say you start adding in, well, we're going to have maybe another $500,000 in hiring costs, and now you're at $800,000. I worry about the culture change that could slow productivity, and maybe that's another $100,000. You just kind of build these pieces and get the member to think out loud about it and come up with a number. In this case, I'd argue it's probably $1 million issue, something like that. But again, it doesn't matter. Don't get caught up on this. I had a controller that I used to drive her crazy. I feel so bad for her. I hope she's recovered from working with me for so many years, because she would come in and I would do this type of math relating to our business. And I would say, well, it's consistently inconsistent. And that phrase alone just made her crazy, but it's not accurate. It's not right. And I just want to caution you, as you go into spitballing impact, dollar impact, you will have members that have a great finance and accounting background, and God bless those folks. We need them for sure. We need them. People like me especially need them. But that's not this exercise. It's a spitball. It's a back of a napkin. It's just directional. And so don't get caught up on it. What you do want to get caught up on is, you could argue, this is $1 million issue. And how do we as a group help this member resolve $1 million issue? How do we follow up to make sure that they're driving $1 million worth of impact into their business? And how do we remind members that millions and billions of dollars of impact can come from being part of a community like Vistage? That is the message, Meredith, that you want to drive home. Is it's all about working together to make our business and our lives and our community stronger. And if you spitball a number and that helps people focus, that helps you follow up, and that helps members take action on something that's significant inside their business, we as a chair have done our jobs.
Thanks for listening to the ChairLife podcast. Remember, you can find more resources at tomcuthbert.com. Please let others know about our podcast by sending them to chairlifepodcast.com. See you next time on the ChairLife podcast.